Child of God, hear me. This is no accident. Heaven didn't just drop this message in your path by chance. This moment was written into your story long before you felt the weight of your battles. You are hearing these words because your life has already sent ripples into realms you cannot see. The quiet, yes you whispered to God when no one else believed. The faith you held on to when logic told you to let go. The tears you sowed in prayer when the room was dark and the answers seemed far away. Every choice, every sacrifice, every step in obedience has been building something powerful inside you, a divine pull that draws heaven's power to your life. I want you to picture this: every act of faith you've taken, even the smallest ones, has been like laying down a piece of holy metal in your spirit. And over time, those pieces have formed a magnet, one that heaven recognizes, one that angels respond to, one that miracles cannot resist. You didn't stumble into this position, you were forged into it. The road you walked was never meant to be easy, but it was holy. Every moment you thought was breaking you was actually building you into a vessel that could carry God's glory. You see, miracles aren't random. They're not a lottery ticket you hope to win. They are the inevitable response of heaven when a life is aligned with God's will. And alignment isn't about perfection, it's about surrender. It's the courage to keep walking when the path feels lonely, the humility to keep serving when nobody applauds, and the trust to believe that Jeremiah 29 verse 11 is still true, even when your surroundings look nothing like the promise. God has been watching, not in a distant, detached way, but with the eyes of a loving Father who saw every unseen sacrifice, every silent battle, every moment you chose Him over comfort. While the world overlooked you, the courts of heaven documented every seed you planted in faith. And those seeds have been growing in soil you couldn't see, watered by the prayers you prayed when you felt you had no strength left. The Holy Spirit has been preparing you for this exact season. The delays weren't punishments, they were divine alignments. Heaven operates on Isaiah 46 verse 10. Timing the end was declared from the beginning, and nothing can derail what God has already spoken over your life. You weren't just enduring, you were being calibrated to match the frequency of your miracle. And when heaven and earth meet in that kind of harmony, breakthrough is no longer a possibility, it becomes a certainty. Everything you went through had a purpose. Not a single tear was wasted, not a single prayer was ignored. You may not have seen immediate results, but God's plan was never about instant gratification. It was about eternal positioning. You were never just waiting, you were becoming. So hear me clearly, you are a magnet for miracles. Not because of luck, not because of coincidence, but because you paid the price. Because you stayed faithful when walking away would have been easier. Because you trusted God when nothing made sense. And because you chose the altar over the applause, the narrow road over the wide gate, obedience over comfort. Yet those choices came with a cost. They thought you'd give up. Truth be told, there were nights when the weight pressed so hard you could hardly breathe. Days when your prayers felt like they were bouncing off the ceiling and the silence from heaven seemed endless. But you did something powerful. You kept getting up when no one was there to see it. You kept pressing in when it would have been easier to walk away. That decision in the hidden places was not small in the courts of heaven. Storm after storm came, each one fierce enough to shake foundations. People saw the lightning, but only God saw how it struck your heart. And yet you didn't let the strike set you on fire for destruction. You let it refine you. You let the rain soak the soil of your faith so that roots went deeper, not weaker. It would have been easier to let disappointment define you, but you chose to let perseverance shape you. Galatians 6 verse 9 whispers its truth into such moments that if we don't grow weary in doing good, the harvest will come in due season, and heaven knows you stayed the course. The silence was the hardest test. No answers, no prophetic confirmations, no sudden breakthroughs to confirm you were on the right path. But the absence of sound did not silence your song. When it was quiet, you still lifted your hands. When there was no spotlight, you still offered worship. It wasn't a performance, it was an offering. It was costly because it was given without applause, and that is why it was precious to God. James 1 verse 12 declares blessing over those who remain steadfast under trial, and your steadfastness has been recorded in heaven's archives. There were moments when the crowd thinned. Not everyone who started the journey stayed to see the middle, much less the end. People you thought would be beside you walked away. Some left quietly, others with words that stung. But while their departure was visible, your decision to stay planted was even more visible to God. You chose stability when instability was tempting. You anchored yourself in the one who never leaves nor forsakes. You gave generously even when your hands felt almost empty. Your generosity wasn't about surplus, it was about faith. It was a declaration that you trusted the giver more than you feared the lack. Like the widow who gave her last 2 coins, your giving became a testimony not of wealth, but of devotion. God watched that too, and in his economy what is sown in scarcity is multiplied with divine abundance. Comfort called your name more than once. There were opportunities to step back, to choose ease over obedience, to exchange the weight of calling for the illusion of peace. But you knew peace without purpose is a counterfeit. You didn't trade the destiny God carved for you in exchange for a softer road. You stood in the narrow way, even when it felt lonelier than you imagined it could be. Heaven saw the loyalty that didn't make headlines. It saw you show up to pray when no one joined you. It saw you speak life when bitterness wanted to take the mic. It saw you honor God in your thoughts, even when your circumstances made no sense. It saw the fight behind your amen, the tears behind your smile, the faith behind your silence. What you may not have realized is that your endurance has been planting seeds this whole time. Every act of faith, every refusal to quit, every yes in the face of no, was breaking ground for your supernatural promotion. The ground may not have shown green shoots yet, but beneath the soil, heaven's economy has been multiplying your seed in ways you can't yet comprehend. 2 Timothy 4 verse 7 echoes over your journey. You have fought the good fight, you have finished the race, and you have kept the faith. You stood when sitting would have been justified. You pressed forward when retreat would have been understandable. You didn't just survive, you honored God in the survival. And because of that, the records of heaven testify on your behalf. The reward is not just coming, it's been set in motion. You stood when you could have sat down, and heaven took note. Your reward is on the way. The deepest battles you've fought are the ones no one clapped for, but heaven applauded every single one. You didn't need a crowd, a platform, or public validation. You stood in places where applause was replaced with silence, and yet you kept going because your heart knew who you were really serving. Matthew 6 verse 4 reminds me that the Father who sees in secret will reward openly, and that's not just a promise, it's a reality already in motion over your life. There were moments when bitterness could have felt like the only safe shelter, but instead you laid your heart bare before God and forgave. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the highest strength, because it means you chose God's justice over your own vengeance. That choice rewrote spiritual outcomes in ways you couldn't see. And when the fire of proving yourself burned hot in your chest, you walked away with peace instead of pride. That was a war not everyone could understand. It's one thing to win an argument, it's another to win heaven's favor by surrendering the right to be right. That restraint was not loss, it was kingdom victory. You have been the bridge where others would have burned one. You restored relationships instead of severing them, even when the cost was your own comfort. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 says, "The Lord does not look at what people look at, Man sees the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And he saw the heart it took to choose restoration over retaliation. There were also seasons where holding your tongue felt like swallowing fire. You could have spoken exposed and justified yourself, but you kept quiet, not because you had no defense, but because you trusted God to be your defender. In the courts of heaven, that silence spoke louder than any accusation could have. You stayed faithful when you felt invisible, overlooked, even replaceable. That kind of loyalty doesn't happen by accident. It's forged in the furnace of devotion. You showed up when no one asked. You prayed when no one heard. You served when no one said thank you. And every act was recorded in heaven's books, not one forgotten. Temptation called to you sometimes loudly enough to drown out reason, but you walked in purity anyway. Not because it was easy, but because you valued intimacy with God above the fleeting pleasure of compromise. That choice built a wall around your destiny that the enemy could not breach. You said yes to God's way, even when it cost you everything. Dreams, relationships, comfort, and the approval of those you wanted to please. That yes became the seed of a harvest you haven't even seen yet, even. Colossians 3 verse 23 to 24 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, and not for human masters, because it is from the Lord you will receive your inheritance." That's not just a distant hope, it's a present assurance that your unseen obedience is stacking up eternal reward. Through it all, you've been building what I call spiritual credit deposit after deposit of faithfulness, integrity, and hidden obedience. And in God's economy, nothing invested in Him ever returns void. You've been making kingdom deposits in secret, but the withdrawal season is coming. There is something sacred about what was done in secret. The unseen sacrifices carry a supernatural weight in the kingdom that public acts can't compare to. Every tear you cried in private was counted. Every decision to obey when no one was watching was multiplied. The God who saw it all is not just remembering it, He's responding to it. You thought no one saw, but the God who sees in secret is about to reward you openly. Not every open door is from God, and you've learned to wait for the one He unlocks Himself. Some doors swing wide with promises that glitter in the light, but hide shadows behind them. Others come wrapped in urgency, as if missing them means missing your moment. But you've come to understand that timing and truth matter more than speed and shine. You didn't just want motion, you wanted His direction. There were moments when offers came that seemed perfect on the surface, the kind that looked like answered prayers to everyone else. Yet in your spirit, you felt a gentle restraint. The world might call it hesitation, but heaven called it discernment. You didn't just weigh the opportunity, you measured it against the word of God and the peace He placed in your heart. Deuteronomy 5 verse 33 reminds us to walk in all the way the Lord commands, so that we may live and prosper in the land He is giving us. You understood that straying even slightly from His way could cost more than the opportunity was worth. You could have taken the shortcut. You could have grabbed what was within reach. But you knew that some shortcuts lead straight off the cliff of destiny. It takes more strength to wait than to rush, more courage to decline than to accept. The crowd may have moved forward in a hurry, but you stayed still until the shepherd's voice said, "Go." And in that stillness, your faith grew muscles. You weren't delaying your future, you were protecting it. Some paths looked harmless, even beneficial, but they were not your assignment. Psalm 37 verse 23 says, "The steps of the righteous are ordered by the Lord." And you wanted every step to be ordered, not assumed, not guessed, not borrowed from someone else's story. You trusted that His not yet wasn't a rejection, but a preparation. It was never about missing the blessing. It was about being ready to carry it. It wasn't always easy to let go of something that seemed good. You saw others seize opportunities you walked away from. You felt the sting of wondering if you had just passed by your one shot. But deep down, you knew God's best is never threatened by someone else's timing. What He has written for you will not be delivered to another's door. You released the good so you could receive the great, even if that meant enduring seasons of waiting that tested your patience and trust. Every time you chose obedience over opportunity, you built a track record in heaven. Heaven remembers the times you closed the door that everyone else would have forced open. Heaven remembers the days you laid your own ambitions on the altar so His will could stand taller than your desire. And heaven rewards those who choose alignment over advancement. Proverbs 16 verse 9 declares that in our hearts we may plan our course, but it is the Lord who establishes our steps. You surrendered the pen of your story back into His hands, trusting Him to write the chapters in the right order. You didn't just trust God for the open door, you trusted Him to keep the wrong doors shut. That kind of faith is rare. Many want Him to move quickly. Few want Him to move correctly. You were willing to miss what was popular to receive what was purposed. You didn't just avoid traps, you preserved the very miracle season you are stepping into. Every no you spoke to the wrong path was a yes to His divine plan. Each step of restraint was a seed sown into your harvest. And now the ground you've been cultivating through patience, trust, and obedience is about to bear fruit you could never have manufactured on your own. Every refusal, every release, every act of waiting has built a runway for heaven's best to land in your life. You didn't miss your moment, you made room for it. And the miracle you're about to walk into will carry the fingerprints of God, not the fingerprints of compromise. Others called it foolish, but heaven called it faith. You planted seeds when your own ground looked dry. You didn't wait for perfect conditions, and you didn't demand a forecast before you sowed. You gave when logic told you to save. You released when fear told you to hold back. That was not recklessness, that was obedience. And obedience in the kingdom is never wasted. I've learned that God's economy doesn't follow the graphs and charts of this world. The world says give when you have more than enough. The kingdom says give, and it will be given to you. Luke 6 verse 38. You stepped into that truth when it wasn't convenient. You gave out of lack, not just abundance. That kind of giving is the language of heaven. It moves the heart of God because it proves your trust wasn't in the security of your account, but in the faithfulness of His hand. What you sowed wasn't always public, and you didn't always receive applause. Your giving often happened in quiet places where no one knew except God. But heaven has a perfect record of it all. While people count coins, God counts the cost, and He saw yours. You didn't just release money, you released worship. Every seed you gave was a declaration, God, you are my source. You are my sustainer. That is why those moments were more than transactions. They were altars. I think about how Proverbs 11 verse 25 says that those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. You became a refreshment to others even when you were parched yourself. That's why your harvest will not simply match what you gave, it will multiply beyond measure. The seed in God's kingdom always carries an echo. When you release it in faith, it doesn't just disappear, it goes ahead of you, prepares the ground, and meets you in a future season as a multiplied blessing. Some people misunderstood your sowing. They thought you were wasting your strength, your money, your time, but that's because they saw the field. God saw the harvest. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 6 reminds us that whoever sows generously will also reap generously. You sowed in a way that stretched your faith, and when faith is stretched, miracles are invited. There were times you gave with trembling hands, but your spirit remained steady because you believed God's promise over your bank balance. You reminded yourself that His provision isn't seasonal, it's supernatural. Seeds given in obedience can outlive your lifetime. They carry an eternal multiplication that reaches into generations. That's why your sowing wasn't just an act of kindness, it was prophetic. You were declaring over your future. This is the kind of harvest I expect, because this is the kind of faith I live by. Your giving wasn't random, it was targeted by the Spirit. There were moments when God impressed on your heart to bless someone specific, to give in a moment of need, to release resources without expecting repayment. Each time you were planting into His eternal field. Those seeds didn't fall to the ground in vain. They fell into the hands of a God who never forgets a single act of obedience. Heaven has been holding those moments like treasures. The times you emptied your hands so God could fill them again. The seasons you said yes, even when it cost you. The days you sowed with tears, but still believed for joy. All of it has been building towards something, your miracle season. Luke 6 verse 38 doesn't just speak of return, it speaks of pressed down, shaken together, running over blessings. That's not poetic exaggeration, that's divine math. And here's the beauty, you won't just reap in the same form you gave. You might have given financially, but the return could come as healing, as restored relationships, as doors that were once locked, suddenly opening. God has a way of packaging blessings in ways we could never predict. You may not recognize the first signs of your harvest, because it will be bigger than what you asked, broader than what you imagined, and better than what you planned. The harvest you're stepping into is not random. It's the echo of every seed you dared to release when it didn't make sense. Those moments of sacrifice are about to meet you in the form of abundance. And when they do, you'll know without a shadow of a doubt, it was never about the size of the seed, but the faith in the sower and the faithfulness of the one who receives it. Friend, delay tried to break you, but instead it shaped you into someone who can carry the blessing without letting it slip through your fingers. What looked like endless pauses were in truth holy workshops, places where heaven was quietly crafting your soul for what it had already prepared. You may have thought you were standing still, but every day you chose to trust. Instead of panic, something eternal was being built in you. There is a sacred truth that most overlook. God's silence is not abandonment, it is preparation. His stillness isn't punishment, but positioning. Like a seed hidden in the soil, you were covered unseen, yet in the very place where life was forming. Isaiah 40 verse 31 reminds me that those who wait on the Lord don't just survive, they renew strength, rise higher, and keep running without growing weary. That was your story in the waiting season. And it wasn't just about getting stronger, it was about becoming steady. Waiting seasons are like the unseen hours an athlete spends training before stepping into the arena. You learn to hold your worship without tying it to a deadline. You didn't praise because an answer had come. You praised because you trusted the one who gives it. That kind of worship is pure. It's the kind that moves heaven. I've learned that the right blessing at the wrong time can turn into a weight too heavy to carry. God's delays aren't rejections, they're divine safeguards. Habakkuk 2 verse 3 declares that the vision is for an appointed time, and though it lingers, it will not delay a moment longer than heaven has marked. Your patience became the proof that you were ready. You didn't demand the gift prematurely, you allowed God to deliver it fully formed. In those hidden days, your faith was not weakening, it was anchoring deeper. You were being refined like gold in fire, your character polished until it could handle the light of greater responsibility. The waiting tested you, but it also protected you. While your heart longed for the promise, heaven was aligning people, places, and opportunities with precision. The delay wasn't random, it was orchestrated. Patience became your armor. It shielded you from making decisions out of desperation. It gave you eyes to see beyond the moment, to believe that even if the night seemed long, the dawn was inevitable. Psalm 27 verse 14 urges, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart," and you did just that. You became unshakable, not because time was short, but because time was long, and you stayed anyway. What most would have used as an excuse to walk away, you used as a reason to draw closer. Faith like that doesn't just survive seasons, it rewrites them. Heaven responds to that kind of steadiness. When everything else is shifting and you choose to stand, you become a magnet for the miraculous. So when the blessing comes, and it will, you won't hold it with trembling, unsure hands. You'll carry it with the quiet confidence of someone who has been through the weight room of waiting. You'll know how to keep it, protect it, and steward it well. This is why the delay was necessary. It was heaven's way of making sure you would never lose what God is about to place in your hands. The world may only see the moment you receive the promise, but heaven knows the countless unseen moments that prepared you for it. Every prayer you prayed without seeing an answer, every tear you wiped in faith, every praise you gave in the silence, they were seeds sown into the soil of patience. And in God's perfect timing, they will burst into a harvest you will not have room to contain. You didn't just wait, you grew. And the God who tested your patience will reward it openly in plain sight as proof that every second in the waiting room of heaven was worth it. But waiting wasn't the only test. Behind closed doors, you faced wars that would have crushed others, but you came out still standing. I know the kind of battles that never make it into conversation, the ones no one else sees, but leave you lying awake in the night, wrestling with fears, doubts, and invisible giants. There were days you carried your cross in silence, where the only witnesses were heaven and the shadows in your room. Yet in those moments you didn't fold. You fought on. You prayed through the exhaustion. You stayed when walking away felt easier. That, my friend, is the mark of a true warrior in the kingdom. I think about the emotional and mental battles, the ones that press so hard on your spirit, it feels like your very breath is under siege. The enemy wasn't just after your peace, he was after your purpose. And yet here you are. You didn't need applause to fuel you. The whisper of the Spirit was enough to keep you moving forward. Those silent nights where your tears became prayers were not wasted. They were stored in heaven as evidence of your faithfulness. You have fought temptation when the opportunity to fall was right in front of you.